Welcome to Daring To, a podcast that finds out how CEOs and entrepreneurs navigate today's business world, the conventions they're breaking, the challenges they faced, and the decisions that they've made. And lastly, just what makes them different. Well, welcome to the episode of Daring To. You know, it's really interesting. I get so many great guests. I'm today, who would think that a banker and an industrial sewing machine, put those two together, right? That's pretty daring. What do you do if you cross an ex-banker with an industrial sewing machine? Patrick, I'm delighted to welcome you on the show. Thank you for joining me. Patrick, you are the CEO of the company of the PLIQO. PLIQO, I'm going to make sure I say that right. PLIQO, right? And the only, I think, ultra compact traveling bag that has been developed. Innovation within itself. But I've got to ask you, right? A banker, a financial banker. Most people say why would you give that up and then go and get an industrial sewing machine? There's got to be a story there, surely. Come on.
There is. Rita, first of all, thank you for hosting me on the show. It's a real privilege. There is a story. You're absolutely right. So I was a financier for many years and a frequent flyer. And it was really only because of a personal tragedy in my life that I had the opportunity to stop, so to speak, what I was doing and to start again on a different and more entrepreneurial and creative course. So when I was 39 years old, my wife passed away and I was left with 2 young children. And I decided not to go back into finance, but to start out as a child carer, essentially, a house husband. Now, as my children got older, I discovered that I had time on my hands and the opportunity to come back into the workforce. Originally, I started as a business copywriter, my background being in finance and management. But there was this problem that continued to nag me, dating back to my days as a frequent flying financier, which was how to travel with a suit without having to wear it or crush it into your hand luggage. And essentially, it was this problem that I eventually came around to solving, starting around 5 years ago.
So, as a frequent flyer, well, before COVID-19, a frequent flyer at least, I feel that pain of having to pack a bag, go to lots and lots of different meetings, have different outfits for different occasions, depending on what you're doing, and then finding that when you get there, everything's all screwed up or crumpled. But, it's a really interesting insight that you took you went into a completely different field. Now, often people are really challenged when they think about taking on board this idea of starting their own business and being creative enough and daring enough to actually test that out. So, it wasn't a skill set that you necessarily had. So talk us through, how did you kind of develop that? What skills did you have, you think, that you gained from your financial career that you were able to apply, firstly? And then what did you have to learn that was new and different?
Absolutely. So, finance and, I was working in a large corporation, a FTSE 100 company within that. So, it was about finance and understanding finance, but it was also about management. And I think those skills stand you in good stead, whatever you are doing, but they definitely don't prepare you for the kind of holistic skill set that you need to set up and run your own business. Now, coming to the creative side of things, my grandfather was an engineer, and my mother was a very creative person, painter and drawer. And I think that was always in me and perhaps a little bit suppressed while I was working in finance. So
not many people would say that finance people are creative. And I have many friends who are financiers, so please, I'm only joking really, but it's like they joke, right? So
yeah, I guess there are some of these guys who create, new complex derivative financial instruments who have a sort of creativity. But I would say, by and large, when you're in management, it is much more about operating successfully within constraints and parameters that are normative, and creativity tends to thrive better outside of that kind of environment. I mean, there are exceptions, I guess, people like Steve Jobs, but, there may be few and far between. So, yes, I mean, in a way, it really wasn't until I'd thrown off the shackles of working in finance. And I had time, literally, Rita, just to, sit on the bus and stare out of the window and think about this, essentially a first world problem, but a problem for many people, which is, what to do about, traveling with your suit.
And so let's talk a little bit about, the very fact that as an entrepreneur, when you start out, it's difficult. You have to have, you've got an idea, you have a concept, probably don't have a lot of money to be able to necessarily get it off the ground, and you've got to test out whether it works or not. Now, I've kind of done a little bit of research on you because that's what I tend to do. And I was really interested to discover that you actually went back to night school, hence the industrial sewing machine, and actually learned how to sew so that you could make some prototypes. Tell me a little bit about testing out those prototypes. I mean, when you said to people, hey, look, I've sewn this bag, I've made it, what was the reaction of people when you decided to say, this is what I'm doing? Talk a little bit about the reaction to that.
Well, I think by and large, people were intrigued. So, I'm very lucky to be that kind of age and that kind of position in life where, I have a lot of friends who are still in senior management in, finance and FMCG companies and lawyers and so on. So it wasn't difficult for me to find a set of people who were prepared to work with me very closely and very loyally on this. So I think, there was no problem with the concept, but I think what you alluded to before a couple of times, absolutely right, which is, people were flabbergasted that I had this industrial sewing machine in my front window.
Such a good word, flabbergasted. I think, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that's such a good word, flabbergasted, because I actually was. I think that described me when I read, you've got an industrial sewing machine and a financer. So fabulous word. Didn't mean to interrupt, but tell me about that. Why were people
No, I mean, it's fine. Really, it's quite funny. I don't think I can sort of describe the situation accurately, but I signed up for bag making, sewing courses at my local college of further education just up the road. And, the day I turned up for registration, there were 11, women there and me. I mean, they looked at me as though I was either mad or I'd gotten the wrong cue or something. And it was kind of sweet because in the classes, they were all making these lovely, exquisite little leather purses and things. And I was there with kind of heavy duty nylons and polyesters trying to sort of fashion this first prototype version of my bag. And, I wouldn't say it was hugely comic, but I mean, it was just kind of slightly odd, I guess, for them and for me.
So let's talk a bit about how this product's actually evolved, because, you've now grown it into a successful business. And what I'm finding interesting when I have guests on the show is there is a common theme around sort of successful entrepreneurs, which is their ability to really look at the market and understand their products or their solutions or their concepts from that customer perspective. And it feels like you really did your homework, if you like, of knowing, number one, what it feels like, i.e. as a traveller, what that looks like and feels like when you have to travel, and how can you kind of manage that. But testing out that product. What advice would you give other entrepreneurs about the need to really understand what people want versus what you think they want? What's your kind of tips and takeaways around that?
Wow. I mean, that is a really interesting question. So, I think there are some obvious things there, which is, do your field research very, very thoroughly. Now, I was in a slightly unusual and happy situation, which was that, I had a kind of thriving commercial writing business at the time. And so I was dedicating, 2.5 days a week to the writing and 2.5 days a week to the bag. There was no mad financial pressure to, bring the bag to market. So I spent, probably literally 18 months making prototypes, reviewing them, improving the prototypes, reviewing them again with, the kind of people who I knew this product was designed for. So, I mean, definitely, there is an argument for saying, and some people do move fast and break things. Who is that? Is that Google or Facebook or someone? And, maybe for some kind of products that works, but for this kind of product, it would not have worked. When you are ordering a minimum of 1,000 bags, if they're not actually right for the marketplace, then, you're never going to move to your second order. So I think there is something around there about, despite the tendency, if you think you have a great idea, to rush to market with it, be patient and make sure that it is, absolutely the best thing that it can be before you launch it on the world.
And so I think that's a really good advice. But at some point you did need funding. So how did you sort of look at expanding that business and taking that idea forward? Crowdsourcing was something that you pursued. Not a lot of people really know the value around crowdsourcing. So from your perspective, what were the benefits of going out and trying to crowdsource money to help fund the idea to take it to the, where you really wanted to take it?
Yeah, and so absolutely. I think in terms of supporting entrepreneurship, crowdfunding has been one of the most revolutionary things of the last 10 years. Now, I know the big platforms, have their critics, but to be quite honest, they were a godsend to me. What do they give you? Basically, they give you two things. They validate that your idea has an audience, has a marketplace, and they provide you with financial security by giving you the money up front to place your first order. And if you're doing something like I'm doing, which is a physical good and needs to be manufactured in quantity to be viable, that is absolutely critical. So in a nutshell, it's those two things.
So we're going to talk about you and boldness, because there's a lot of, obviously, work, I guess, that's been done, research that talks about skills and capabilities that leadership needs, whether you call it courage, whether you call it determined, whether you call it bold. Let's talk about some of those individual capabilities. So let's talk about boldness for a minute. So many of my listeners are not in the UK, but if they are listening to this and I mention Dragon's Den, I would say to them, think of the equivalent of Shark Tank, because that's a show that takes entrepreneurs and moves them forward. Now, in fairness, you got a bit of stick for that at the end of that program in the UK. You actually went on Dragon's Den, which is for entrepreneurs to sort of showcase their idea, their concept, their innovation, and get some funding from some very experienced entrepreneurs who are now very successful and looking to invest. There you were, all excited to go on the show. Having got through that, I'm sure they have a long list of people. So your idea obviously resonated. But after the show, there was a kind of a bit of a backlash to your response, which was to walk away from the cash. Now, that must have been hard to take in some ways. And what would you say you learnt from being on that show and being in that kind of pressure situation? Was it boldness? Was it around actually sort of stepping back and reflection and saying, maybe it was boldness, but, with maybe I needed to do some more thinking? Or was it absolutely just follow my idea and, I don't care how experienced somebody is, I know I've got something and I'm not prepared to compromise it? Was it all of those above? I mean, I was juggling all those things like balls in the air, thinking I wonder what's going through Patrick's head when he was thinking that. And how did he react to all of that criticism and, stick that he got? Stick, for those of you I don't understand, is slang for flack or grief. I don't know, whatever you want to call it. But unfortunately, you were, great media coverage. But personally, let's talk about it. What's it like? What was that? And what is that an example of for you as a leadership capability?
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there, but let me preface everything by saying, Rita, that what you see on the television, my segment is about 12 or 13 minutes, but behind all of that is, in my case, an hour of discussions and negotiations that essentially, to make this compelling for the viewers and short enough to broadcast, is massively oversimplified. Mm-hmm. So, we had a lot of quite technical discussions that were not broadcast around valuation methodologies. Now, that may not be of much interest to your listeners either. But, obviously there are several different ways of valuing companies, and it will vary depending on whether it's a mature business, or whether it's, like mine, is a startup. And essentially the problem, and this was not aired, the problem was that, we couldn't agree on a valuation methodology. And, I really felt that I was banging my head against a brick wall saying, you should not be valuing my startup like Unilever or, some other very mature business. You should be valuing it on a different basis. I mean, I won't go into the methodologies unless you think it's interesting, but essentially all this had happened. And what became clear to me during the discussions was that, they weren't going to budge on the way they thought that my company should be valued. And I wasn't going to concede on the way I thought it should be valued. And really, on that basis that we were not going to agree on a valuation methodology, the many other benefits that would have accrued to me of taking investment around, the expertise of these, very shrewd business people would count for nothing, because I would essentially be, to my mind, giving away the company for much less than it was worth. Now, as I said, unfortunately, all that subtlety was lost. And, in my opinion, I think it looks like I walk away rather petulantly, having had a sort of 10-minute discussion about, the company, the product and the business. So that essentially was at the heart of it. Would I say that was bold? I don't know. I think that sounds a bit self-aggrandizing. I don't think it was foolish. I do think if I'd accepted a lowball offer of investment, I would be regretting it now and cursing myself forever, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I guess upon reflection, you look back and you say, hey, people don't necessarily get to see all of the things that go on in these situations. But as you reflect back on it, you go, well, maybe that judgment call was a good call for giving where the business is today. I guess there's some learnings that come from just being in that kind of it's a high pressure environment to be in. And I think we often think that, that's TV. But the reality is, in business, there are so many high pressure situations, and particularly as an entrepreneur trying to get something off the ground, there are many, many high pressure situations. So having what you learn from those high pressure situations are so powerful. Can you think of any of the ones that have been really powerful for you, either after Dragon's Den or in other situations that have been high pressured, but you've learned something that said, well, I may do something differently next time, or actually I would do that again in a heartbeat. What kind of experiences can you share with some listeners around that? Because I expect that there will be many of those situations that they find themselves in.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. I think the main learning point from the Dragon's Den negotiations, and indeed from any negotiation, is, if you are confident that you have a solid business proposition, then you should not be afraid of walking away.
That's a great answer. So follow the passion. If you believe in something that is really important to you and you know that it's worth something and it's an idea, follow it through. Don't be scared to follow that through to fruition. So I've got to talk about COVID-19. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Rita. I'm just sort of going to extend on that and say, it's really, it's about two things. The first is, to be a successful entrepreneur, you have to have a certain amount of bravado and self-confidence. But there's no point in having that unless, you can back that up with, something that's a really solid proposition. Now, I turned down the Dragon's investment, but I have no doubt that at some stage in the future, I'll be talking to people about investment again, because I do believe that it's a good product, and I don't think it would have got on Dragon's Den if it weren't. And so, essentially, it's not like this was a wasted experience. I think a lot of people who were kind of commenting and watching this said, what a waste, what a fool. He got this far, he fell at the final fence. I don't believe that.
I actually think it's a great sort of learning experience for people to not take away that from that, from what they saw, because I think entrepreneurs, whether it's, in the situation with those very experienced entrepreneurs or in other high pressure situations, sometimes you're in those situations and you make a decision and you have time to reflect on them and you say, you know what, it may not have come across in the way that I wanted it to, or people didn't necessarily get to see it all. But actually, I know what I have to, I know, and I'm confident in what I'm trying to follow through on. And I've got to trust that and trust my instinct on what's the right thing to do. So, I think that's a good takeaway for people to take from sometimes what they see, because there are so many situations in which you can apply the learnings from that situation. Now, I've got to ask you, right? You're in a business that, 3 months ago, I would have said, wow, like you must be on a trajectory of like massive growth. I was traveling probably, I don't know what, maybe in a month, I was on the road for 3 weeks of those, traveling all around the world. Since the beginning of March, not so much, not at all, in fact. So, and by the way, your product and other businesses that are in similar situations where a product can really scale in certain markets and in certain situations in others, they can't. How are you rethinking your business strategy, if at all? And are you, in fact, seeing a change or not? Who knows? Maybe you're not.
No, I mean, you're absolutely right. I have seen sales, it's not too melodramatic to say you fall off a cliff. Really, no one is traveling and no one or very few people are thinking about buying travel goods. What am I doing? Probably the kind of obvious things that many companies are doing, which is like, looking at discretionary spending, cutting back on that. So I'm not spending anything on marketing. I'm trying to pare back all other overheads and to some extent put the business into a kind of, hibernation until this is over. At the same time, for me as a business owner, there have been some opportunities to sit and look at some strategic things that I keep postponing because there's always something operational to do. There's always some fire to fight. And, I'm doing a really thorough review of where there are, more opportunities for sales channels growth when all this is over. New markets, product development, for example. We're right in the middle of doing something and I've been able to spend much more time with that. So, as I said at the start of the show, every cloud sort of has a silver lining. And, it's allowed me to take a step back and look at some of those, important things that always get sort of, pushed to the bottom of the in tray, really. Because there are, other more pressing things.
I can't tell you the amount of people that have made that very comment about it's almost like a liberation, right? We suddenly have time where we can stop, breathe, think, and actually plan. And it's such an important point, I think, for listeners to sort of take away, that this isn't necessarily, we've fallen off a cliff, because yes, that may have happened in the sense of where you were, but actually there's such a great opportunity to sort of step back and do, as you said, the things that you want to do, but like we just haven't had the time to do. And there's an opportunity, that window of opportunity to really leverage until, things change again. So I think that's a really valuable piece of information to actually say, take advantage of the time to really step back and look.
No, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. And I think there's also a very kind of interesting question out there, which is to what extent will this experience change the way we think about what we're doing, when the crisis is over? How much of the lessons of this, tragic episode will stick, and, something, positive, if you like, in terms of change will come out of this? Or conversely, will we just go back to how we were before?
Let's challenge our listeners to that. I think we should take a poll. What's your bet? Let's you and I kick it off, and then to say what percentage do you think of all the things that people have learned, new tools, new technologies, time that they're using, how they're spending it, what they're doing, what percentage of it do you think is going to stay the same? Like that people are going to actually implement the new stuff, or people are going to forget it?
I think there are some useful things, and, this platform that we're talking on now, I think it is one of them. And, I think people will rely on this kind of, remote conferencing much more going forward. I hate to say this as someone who sells travel products, but, people might think more diligently coming out of this, do I need to be rushing around so much on a plane, which, while it has its glamorous moments, is not particularly great for the environment and, quite sort of wearing for the frequent flyer. I used to be one myself, and you are too. So I think there will selectively be things that come out of this that people stick with, and other things. The enjoyment of the solitude that we've maybe been having is great, but I think we'll all be craving proper old-fashioned human company and getting together for dinner and stuff like that, and going to the movies, and that I think people will want to get back to. They won't kind of continue to sit at home and watch Netflix because that's the only thing there is to do.
I do agree with you. I think that human connection is really important too. So I'm going to take a percentage bet. I'm going to be bold and out there, and I think that we will see around 45% of change in behaviour and things that people do differently and businesses do differently going forward. There's my bold bet for the future. If I crash and burn, I'll have learnt something, because I will have some more insights that will take me to a different place. So that's my challenge to everybody. Let's see what maybe our listeners come back with as well, and put a poll out there when we air this episode to see what people think they're going to actually take forward in terms of new insights and new learning. So I actually think, it's interesting. You've developed this compact bag, which means you can actually take it on the plane with you. You don't have to put it through all of that luggage. You don't have to get it all weighed and the rest of it. You're basically looking after it yourself. I wonder, in the days forward, when travelling will probably start again as people get more comfortable, isn't that an opportunity in some way, because you're less concerned about it touching so many people's hands and being in so many different ways? I don't know. Sounds like it could be an opportunity for your product. Maybe not. Who knows? But
thank you, Rita. Well, I'm certainly hoping
free
so.
Sales advice. There you go. I don't mind.
Thank you.
I hope not. No, I mean, I'm being serious. In all honesty, I think, it's ideas like that actually you can see how they can be applied and actually, help. They can help in so many different ways to enable travellers to be forward. Who knows? But I put it out there because I'm sure that there are many other sort of products and ideas that businesses might have. And what you did was take a problem and actually think about, well, how do you make it easier on so many different levels that can deliver something unique and different? And I'm not sure that will go away. I think that potentially has a lot more potential to go forward. So now, having been so nice to you, this is what I thought I'd now come in with with a left hook, if you like. So I love the bag. I'm going to use it, but all you talk about suits and men's suits and how you can get your suit in there. Well, I don't know. I mean, I wear suits too, but I'd like to see you talking a little bit more about women. So.
Oh my God.
So, Mr. Patrick, what are we going to do about this problem?
No, I mean, honestly, I'll tell you the truth, Rita. I am missing 50% of my target market by having a product that is probably fairly overtly, masculine in terms of styling and functionality. And that's not
get out there, get marketing, get some women on your team of I don't know, prototype users.
I just want to explain, okay? So, what I was saying earlier about, your field testing and your market research.
Mm-hmm.
So, as a male business traveler myself back in the day, I kind of felt that I had a fairly good understanding of, what the problem is from a male traveler's perspective. And so I, focused my research and focused my design and focused my marketing and all that other stuff, mea culpa, on the male market. And one of the things that's always, been there in my in tray has been, let's do the research with a cohort of women business travelers to understand, how their needs are going to be different, Do they travel with different kinds of suits, trouser suits or skirt suits? Do they need to pack 2 or 3 blouses? Do they have more cosmetics? All these kind of things that need to be understood and factored into the design. And like I was saying, it was one of the things that always just ended up in the bottom of the in tray because I was trying to boost sales or firefight some other problem. So please rest assured, it is very much on my radar. And, I am very cognizant of the fact that I'm guilty of ignoring this enormous potential market.
Well, the women travellers and businesswomen will be pleased to know that. And obviously, we've talked a lot about the bag being used for travelling, but for business purposes. But I guess you can use it anywhere, can't you? I think my husband would be delighted to know that I might actually have a bag for going away to visit friends that doesn't fill up the whole, back of the car.
It's great. It's great for country house weekends. It's great for weddings. It's great for musicians, concert musicians. It's great for students, graduating students. All airline pilots, all kinds of people have, come up to me and said, this is perfect. This is just what I need. I think the problem really is in terms of marketing communications, Rita, if you have to simply tell people who is this bag for, it's easier just to say it's for frequent flyers, really, and then people understand, okay, this is really for frequent flyers, but that does involve missing some subtlety around, the other niche markets, perhaps, that are for the bag. But basically anyone who ever needs to look smart could or should have a bag like this.
And actually, that's a really good sort of insight for listeners as well. So if you're a kind of, an entrepreneur trying to think about how you position what you've got as an offering or a solution, being really crystal clear and it not trying to be everything, but focusing in on what it is really helpful. And it sounds like that's exactly what you did. So be clear on who you're appealing to, because then people get it, they understand it. So that makes a lot of sense. Again, another great piece of advice for people as they're kind of thinking about developing their propositions and or are in the throes of developing their business, because it's easy, as someone who is guilty of doing that, of having so many ideas around how different solutions can apply and be used, that you tend to want it to tell everything rather than pulling back and actually saying, no, yes, I understand it can do all of that, but let's focus on something that's core first. So I think that's some really good advice.
No, I think you raised a really interesting point there, because, when you're bringing a new product to market, you want your sort of strapline or your elevator pitch to be very functional, because people basically won't be familiar with this. So they need to know, what is it that it does, the USP essentially. I think if you become a very well-established brand like Nike, you can have something much more aspirational, just do it, because everyone knows who you are. So you almost need to think about how you describe your product and your strapline that goes with it as something that evolves. My original one was, the most compact garment bag in the world, because it was the smallest. And since then, since it's become a little better known, I've sort of changed it to the smartest garment bag in the world, which, it is very smart. It's smart because it's clever, and it's smart because it looks good, but it's less sort of functional.
Yep.
And, going forward, I could have something that wasn't really about the bag at all, the future is unfolding, because the bag folds, but it doesn't really tell you what kind of product it is. And I think that's it's a great point that you've highlighted here about, when you're marketing, you're thinking of, describing your product, how you need to think about which stage in this process of evolution your business is at.
So let's move it just slightly for two last questions. Well, actually three questions. The first one is, your story is quite an inspiring story, and I'm sure that it must be for your children, to having sort of been in what was a sad situation, but taking on this role of staying at home and caring for your children, and then from that sort of demonstrating those kinds of values and principles to your own children, and then taking an idea, a creative idea that you have, and making that happen. That's quite inspirational, quite much of a role model for your children. Do you see that, do you think? Do you ever think about that playing out in your situation?
That's really an interesting question. I wasn't expecting this kind of question at all. I don't know if you have a family yourself, Rita, but when I think about my own situation, I think you only understand the contribution that your parents have made to your development way after the event, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. So, it's now only in middle age that I actually appreciate the sacrifices and the sacrifices my parents made, the example that they set. My children who are 19 and 20, I think still very much kind of live in the day. So, if they're fed and they're watered and they're, comfortable and, well socialized with friends, I think that tends to be the extent of, how they look at the world and how they look at, my parenting skills. So, I think the jury is still out on to what extent, this has been positive role modeling for them. I did want to just say one other thing about parenting, because obviously I have combined that, as a single parent with launching a couple of businesses. If you can manage to raise two children and, you get them more or less out the door and they're well adjusted and well socialized, that's probably the most difficult challenge you're going to have in your life. Relatively speaking, running a business, dealing with other adults, even dealing with crises like coronavirus, I think, are relatively straightforward.
God, I can hear all the listeners.
Emotional intelligence, less.
All of the listeners, I can almost visualize them right now, just like nodding their heads, going, "Yeah, I get it. I so agree to what you've just said." I can feel them. I don't have children, but I can feel them, because there's so many people that will say, what you think is tough, actually, just fall back on the skills that you've actually got, because as a parent, you've got so many great skills that are so applicable in the business world, right? I mean, that's the reality of the situation, that we undermine those skills sometimes. We don't put them in that context.
I think so. I think your background is in HR, but I was, thinking about this today ahead of our conversation. And, I think HR and people skills should be put absolutely top of the agenda for anyone in management. Not finance, not, supply chains, not, PowerPoint presentations, but, it should be the emotional intelligence and the human side of things. And, I think that's, I have learned from parenting how to be a better person in business, not necessarily a better businessman, but a better, human in the way that I interact with, all my stakeholders.
Well, a powerful lesson, I think. And, I actually think the coronavirus is teaching leaders today to be more humane in many ways and have more empathy in many ways than they've needed to before. And that might be that kind of burning platform that we needed to have the kind of leadership that we all look for and admire and want to see around the world. So, it feels like we're on this, kind of, I don't know, I think a precipice of maybe some really good things coming out of what we're seeing. And I think those insights that you've given around sort of parenting will resonate so well with so many people who do have to balance both, by the way. I mean, it's not an easy thing to have to do. And it's a reality that there is other things in the world that you have to balance along with business. And you've shown that it is possible to do, and that actually some of the other stuff is a lot harder. So don't lose sight of that. Well, it sounds like your business is really expanding, and we wish you really well with it. And so I think just some really heartfelt lessons and learnings that you've been able to give people today are going to be really helpful for people as they're whatever stage they are at their businesses, and actually even really experienced CEOs, I think, have an opportunity to really reflect. It's getting some of the basics right and really thinking about what's important and how you connect and follow a dream and make it come true is the important thing. But there's always one question that I have to ask, which is, I like to ask, which is a daring to moment. I mean, you must have so many. I could think about 10 that you've already said, but let's try and think of some ones that we haven't heard. So what's your daring to moment that you would say that you have had, either personally, professionally, that you would like to share with people that they could maybe think about and reflect on?
Thank you. I mean, you're right. There have been several junctures, but let me just pick really the most recent one, which was I think to break out of my comfort zone, which was very much rooted in finance and management, and then writing about finance and management, giving that up to actually do something that I'd always hankered to do, which was to create a physical product that, actually did something, albeit in a fairly modest way, to improve people's lives in some way. So just do something that was better, more innovative, more functional than something that had been done before. And, all the kind of risks that go with doing that. And also all the new skills that, I had to really learn quite late in life, in my mid-40s. Going back to night school to learn bag making is just one of them. But, obviously you're running your own business. You've got to be able to manage, every aspect of that. And at the same time, keep the creative side of it going. So I think, daring to go back and, follow my dreams is putting it maybe a little bit too strongly, but this thing that had nagged me for so long to actually get around to doing it.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Patrick. Patrick Tatham, CEO of the PLIQO bag. Patrick, if people want to get hold of you, want to know more about the bag, want to know more about you, more about the company, how can they get hold of you? Is there a website? Is there an email? Is there a Twitter? Is there LinkedIn? What's the best way?
Absolutely. All of those. So website is probably the best way. That's www.pliqobag.com, PLIQOBAG.com. Also there on social media. So thanks so much for giving me the opportunity to flag that, Rita.
Great. And for those that want to know more about Dare Worldwide and what we do to help people and organisations transform, you can find us on www.dareworldwide.com. You can find me on Twitter at Rita_Trahan. And you can check out books and podcasts and thought leadership materials both on LinkedIn and on the website. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks for listening. Enjoyed the conversation? Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes of Daring 2. Also, check out our website, dareworldwide.com, for some great resources around business in general, leadership, and how to bring about change. See you next time.